$850 airports, 651,000 miles of roadways, and built 125,000 public buildings.
Wow. I wonder how many are still.
Most of them are still standing. But here were some of the criticisms. Some of the jobs, they felt were not necessary. For example, herding wild donkeys. But people worked on the range, and so they needed work to do, right? If you're not herding cattle, you need to round up wild horses or wild, donkeys. Some people argued that the funding was really buying political votes. That because Americans were dependent upon WPA jobs that were being funded by Democrats and the New Deal, that they were really, shifting the political landscape by buying people's loyalty and people's votes.
What are their names? Farley and
What's that?
Hopkins? Farley and Hopkins? Is that
Yeah, Hopkins was, Farley was the person who was part of the FDR administration who oversaw these projects. Hopkins was the Secretary of Labor, not Secretary of Labor, but the Secretary who dispersed much of the WPA funding.
Do you have any idea about the total unemployment rate in the United States before the WPA and after this? Did this have a major factor on it?
It did not.
Did not.
In fact, one of the criticisms that I'll talk about a little bit later is that these programs, while they cost a lot of money, did not make a major dent in the unemployment. And so that's one of the criticisms leveled against FDR, that he's not doing enough to bring an end to the suffering of American people. They made fun of it. The WPA was known as we poke along, we piddle along, we putter around, whistle, piss, and argue game. There were all kinds of WPA jokes as well. One person said, one joke went this way. How is King Solomon like a WPA worker? He takes his pick and goes to bed. Another one was, they found a cure for cancer, but they can't get the cure, enough of a cure to make it viable. It's the sweat off of the WPA worker's brow. Okay. Cartoon from the era. Two perspectives.
Well, a couple of them are steps further, and it almost would have been communism. I mean, if he could really went and put everybody that was out of work to work, that would have went right past socialism and into communism, no?
Well, don't forget that FDR is not, contrary to popular opinion, a socialist or a spend and tax Democrat. He was
trying to save it, but
but he wants to maintain a balanced budget,
right.
and you can't do both.
Exactly.
This was one of the major goals of the New Deal that FDR talked about. He realized that oftentimes people underwent hardship through no fault of their own. An act of nature, an act of God, an act of whatever often put people into difficult situations. It had nothing to do with the moral fiber of their character or their willingness to work for what they earned. And so he wanted to create a safety net, especially for the more vulnerable people in American society. This cartoon shows that what he wants to do is he wants to make American society depression-proof, to keep the wolf away from the door.
It kind of worked, sir.
What's that?
It kind of worked. I mean,
Yeah, because of the programs. For example, he talked about providing some kind of social and economic security for people. A situation where they would not be forced to lose their homes or their farms. That if they became ill or injured, that they would have something to fall back on besides their families and local charities, which were oftentimes inadequate. So he wanted to provide some sort of safety net for Americans. He felt that Americans were entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that would come if they felt secure in their lives. We often don't hear much about this woman, Frances Perkins. Frances Perkins was the first woman appointed to a cabinet position. Interestingly enough, she was appointed as Secretary of Labor. Okay. Now, why is that interesting? Because most labor unions were male. And so when the labor unions heard that Frances Perkins had been appointed Secretary of Labor, they believed that it was a slap in the face. What does a woman know about labor and running unions? But they soon changed their mind. Frances Perkins served as Secretary of Labor from 1933 to 1945. She was brilliant, even though her personal life was deeply troubled, especially with her husband and her daughter, which I won't get into, but she was brilliant at doing it. By the way, she dressed dowdily, not because she did not have good taste in clothes, but because she wanted to play down the fact that she was a woman, because she understood what the current she had to navigate. She wanted to appear to be motherly, so people would not perceive her as a threat, because her agenda was much more important than her appearance. That's sort of an unfortunate thing that women often have to deal with, even today.
Secretary of Labor, you said?
Secretary of Labor, yeah. It is she, cartoon showing, this is an important slide. She designed most of the social welfare programs in the New Deal, including Social Security. FDR gets the credit, but the brains behind all of this social legislation that is still with us today was the brainchild of Frances Perkins.
Is there any good books on her?
What's that?
Any good books on her?
Yes. Kirsten Downey just wrote a book about Frances Perkins, which is really an outstanding book. It's both a personal study and a study of her political achievements.
Frances Downey?
Kirsten Downey.
Kirsten.
Yeah. Just a little story about Frances Perkins. Most of you might remember or have heard about the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire that occurred around 1912.
No, I
No?
remember that.
Anybody want to tell a little bit? What was it? Yes.
There was a fire in the building, and since the building was there was no regulation when they built the building, no one was able to escape.
That's right.
Died in the fire.
All the doors were locked.
Yeah.
And who worked in that? Were the men or women?
Women.
Primarily women. Okay. So women were literally burned alive because there were no regulations against protecting women from that kind of abuse, and no regulation governing, the use of buildings. Okay? And so many women either burned to death or plunged to their death. Frances Perkins was about 10 or 12 when she saw this fire firsthand. And so she happened to be there as the bodies were being collected. And it left a deep impression on her as a little girl, as you can imagine. And that kind of shaped her view about the fact that the rights and the safety of workers needed to be protected. And so when she became Secretary of Labor, that's what she put her energies to. So security, it is the most lasting and influential of the New Deal programs. It provided insurance for retirees 65 and up. It provided unemployment compensation for workers who could not find work. And it gave aid to families with dependent children and children who were disabled. As you all know, the money for this would come out of people's paychecks, with the employee paying a portion of it and the government matching that portion. Yes.
Now, obviously, because Social Security still exists to this day, have any of the rules, the implementations been changed to adapt to the modern times, or is it still the exact same Act of 1935?
No, it's not. In fact, I'll show you a couple slides. This is really important, okay? It did not cover farm workers. It did not cover domestic servants or the self-employed. So when the law was first passed, these groups were not covered. Now, why is it important? Well, it leaves out a large part of society in terms of coverage. But most domestic servants were African American women. So they were not covered by Social Security. Farm workers, primarily African American and Mexican American, with some poor whites scattered in between. So if you were a farm worker, no Social Security. If you were self-employed, there was no Social Security. This is not going to change until the 1960s. Some people made fun of it. We were becoming a number. You know, it is against the law to require you to provide your Social Security number. The Social Security, the law was written so that you would not, that number would not be used as a form of identification. Okay, but every time you go out and do something, what do they want? They want your SS number. But by law, you're not required to give it.